is Lauren and welcome to the Theoretical YouTube channel, where the latest Disney animated feature Encanto came out a little more than a month ago. At least as I'm writing this video. But it was also only in theaters for a month before Disney pulled it out from behind a second paywall and released it for free streaming on Disney+. I feel like everyone forgets about the subscription fee when you eliminate the additional $30 hostage demand. Anyway, hardly anyone actually went to go see this film when it first came out, and just recently people have started talking about how good it was online. In particular, everyone and their music theory dabbling grandma has been raving about the song We Don't Talk About Bruno, and to be fair, that song slaps. I'm only 21 and I still feel too old to say that. But while I'll admit that Bruno deserves all of the praise that you want to throw at him, you're all sleeping on another gem from the Encanto soundtrack.
Okay.
Surface Pressure is an absolute masterpiece, and I'm tired of pretending it plays second fiddle to anybody. Of course, the only music theory class I ended up taking in college was for my film studies minor, so instead of talking about why the song itself is so good,
like a drip, drip, drip that'll never stop.
I want to dive deeper into the whole sequence itself. Camera work, writing, characterization, and everything. If I can't be gainfully employed with my degree, I might as well put it to use here. So this is why Surface Pressure is such a good song.
No cracks, no breaks, no mistakes, no pressure.
Okay, I'm actually not that mad about We Don't Talk About Bruno, I just thought that would make a good introduction to the video. As we dive into this sequence, I'm going to break up my discussion points into 3 different categories that I want to address here. The first, of course, being the context in which it appears in the film. What is this song? Why is it being sung? Surface Pressure is the 3rd song in the Encanto soundtrack, performed by Jessica Darrow, who plays Luisa, the oldest sister to Mirabel, our protagonist. If you haven't seen this film yet, both sisters belong to the family Madrigal, who have all been blessed with a magical gift and a super cool house.
La casita.
Luisa's gift is super strength. She can basically lift whatever she's asked to. Like the rest of the soundtrack, Surface Pressure was written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who you might know as the guy who wrote Shiny from Moana, nothing else.
Sparkle like a wealthy woman's neck. Just a sec.
And when you listen to interviews Miranda has done about his history writing for Disney Animation, it becomes abundantly clear that he took major inspiration from the work of Howard Ashman, who wrote the songs for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. If you really want to know how Ashman's contributions to the Disney repertoire literally saved the company, you can check out sections of this video I made about the Disney movie Tangled, but the link's actually in the card up here. In the language of musical theater that Ashman helped Disney reintroduce into their animated pictures, Surface Pressure might best be described as an I Want song.
There's a place, it's usually about the 3rd song of the evening. Sometimes it's the 2nd, sometimes it's the 4th, but it's quite early. But the leading lady sits down on something and sings about what she wants in life. And the audience falls in love with her and then roots for her to get it for the rest of the night.
Which is complicated because, yes, I know Luisa's not the main character and Mirabel already had an epic I Want song like 3 scenes earlier. But to be honest, there's like 3 I Want songs in Encanto and only one of them belongs to Mirabel. We get it, Mirabel's waiting on a miracle. She just wants to be recognized as a valuable member of her family. But her sisters have hopes and dreams too. Luisa has this whole sequence where she sings about the pressure she feels from the responsibility the family puts on her, and Isabella just wants to know what she's capable of when she's not expected to be perfect. And through this lens, both Surface Pressure and What Else Can I Do act as I Want songs, just not for the leading lady. Of course, this isn't the only influence Miranda took from the Howard Ashman formula. Obviously, the opening number of Encanto, the family Madrigal, serves the same purpose as the equivalent bell from Beauty and the Beast. And on a more macro scale, the fact that Miranda was so involved with this film's production beyond the music is a strategy directly lifted from Ashman's role on The Little Mermaid. With Miranda so involved with the actual story process in addition to the songs, the musicality of Encanto naturally entwines itself with its character, script, and atmosphere of the film. Surface Pressure is no exception. In an episode of the podcast 4 Scores, Lin-Manuel Miranda explains that his inspiration for this song, and the character of Luisa herself, largely stemmed from the relationship he has to his own older sister.
And I also was really inspired by my own older sister. I have a sister who's 6 years older, She's much tougher than me, but the secret of that is she's actually much more sensitive than me. You know, you get through the tough exterior and it's this very soft underbelly. She's the easy crier at the movies. She's the worst liar in the family.
This duality or secret self to Louisa is what this sequence is meant to reveal. That beneath her tough exterior is someone who doesn't think she can handle the pressure, or is at least afraid that's the case. And look, I was talking to my own sister and trying to explain why I like this song too much, and she asked me if I related to the character of Louisa. Oddly enough, on the surface, I'd see why she would ask that. After all, I'm the oldest child in a pretty large family, I'm a fairly anxious person, and my name isn't even that far off. But I don't think anyone in my family has ever described me of being the strongest one in the family by any stretch of the imagination. Look at these flappy noodle arms. Even emotionally, I'm not exactly what you'd call a rock in stressful situations. However, I will say that there is a certain level of responsibility that I think all oldest or even older siblings probably relate to. For instance, I have always been held accountable for their actions more than they ever have for mine. In addition to being the first of 6 children, I made 2 people parents and 4 grandparents. And I've done quite a few other firsts before my siblings too. First to go to school, first to play an instrument, first to take driver's ed, first to apply to college, first to become unemployed after graduation because I didn't think my degree all the way through, first to use humor to mask my insecurities, but seriously though, there's a Patreon link in our section down below. My point is this. I don't feel like Louisa, but technically Louisa doesn't even feel like Louisa. That's really the whole point of the song, right? It's about being insecure that the persona being projected onto you doesn't match your inner worth.
I'm pretty sure I'm worthless if I can be of service.
And maybe that is a universal experience.
And God, what would it feel like to not have to present this front all the time? And I think we all have that at one moment or another.
Now that we've got the historical and personal context out of the way, let's dive into the actual lyrics of the song.
Who am I if I can't run with the ball? If I fall to pressure.
Ignoring real music terms and technical distinctions like verse, chorus, bridge, and whatnot, Surface Pressure has 4 distinct parts. The beginning, where Louisa sings about the false persona she embodies for her family.
I'm the strong one.
The middle section, where she reveals that underneath that facade is a constant sense of doubt and anxiety. An incongruent section where she explains that what she really wants is a moment where she's not held responsible under this all-encompassing dread. And a final bit where she pulls that mask back up and resumes singing about why she can't shirk her responsibilities. Ending the song as a confession, but not actually doing anything to fix the problem and not having grown from a character perspective. She's still trapped underneath all that pressure. The only difference now is that she has Mirabel to emotionally support her and help begin the healing process. And one thing you might notice if you listen to or even read some of these lyrics is that they are pretty literal.
Pressure that'll tip, tip, tip till you just go pop.
Even the metaphors and allegories used throughout are pretty straightforward and don't take much deep analysis to dissect. For instance, lyrics like "I'm as tough as the crust of the earth is, I move mountains, I move churches" aren't metaphors. That is so hard to not sing, oh my god.
I move mountains, I move churches, and I glow cause I know what my worth is.
She literally moved a church building less than a minute ago. And if you know anything about Greek mythology, you probably recognize that the one thing Hercules was known best for was his superhuman strength.
Was Hercules ever like, yo, I don't wanna fight Cerberus?
And even the mental image of a ship ramming into an iceberg doesn't take much context to know exactly what Louisa is trying to say. Even the way she physically describes the feelings of pressure tend to be literal examples of tension, like a dripping tap, a ticking bomb, or a tipping scale.
Pressure like a drip, 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 tick, 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 tip, 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 till you just go pop.
But rather than counting the simplicity of these lyrics against the song, I think what they're actually doing is providing an excellent characterization for Louisa. She is a blunt person, not an eloquent wordsmith. Either her similes and analogies are basic because they are such a fundamental part of her internal insecurities, or she's never had to communicate these feelings to anyone else before. Of course she doesn't have sweeping rhetorical language prepared, and that's pretty depressing. But if we we zoom into the last few verses, I think that the most tragic part of the song is its ending. After this whole emotional journey and confession, Luisa pulls her vulnerable self back together and sings this. She doesn't know any other life outside of the responsibilities that her family demands of her, and she has no hope that they will ever release her.
Give it to your sister, it doesn't hurt.
Even though we now know that this is a lie.
See if she can handle every family burden.
A question that she has to ask herself every day.
Watch as she buckles and bends but never breaks. No mistakes.
She gives herself no room for flaws, and the pressure isn't just on her to perform well to her family, but for her family as well. They, and the rest of the Encanto, rely too much on her on a daily basis. More than anyone else in the entire Madrigal family, Luisa's inner worth is directly tied to her magical gift, but not necessarily to her.
Who am I if I don't have what it takes?
She doesn't know. She's never been invited to have an identity outside of her chores or what she can carry.
I'm the strong one.
All her life she has been told that she is the strong one and doesn't have another decent sense of self.
No cracks, no breaks, no mistakes, no pressure.
The song wraps up exactly where it began, with Luisa trying to convince herself that her strength isn't a burden in itself. That the pressure she feels can't be a big deal because she has other people relying on her to get the job done. Therefore, her feelings of inadequacy need to be refuted in order to go soldiering on beneath the mask of strength. And that's the tragedy of surface pressure. It's not just that the family has ignored Luisa's needs for so long that she's developed this whole secret complex about her self-worth, but that even after this deeper confession, she still feels the need to backtrack and invalidate her own feelings because she doesn't even see the hope of relief as an option. No pressure. But where I think this song transitions from being a pretty good feature of the soundtrack to a verified cinematic masterpiece is where music meets visuals. And this is also the moment where I reveal I tricked you all. You thought this was going to be an in-depth look at the song itself, but now you're trapped in a brief explanation of cinematography and animation techniques. You fools! Anyway, if you haven't noticed, Encanto is yet another computer-animated Disney film rather than a more traditional 2D animation style. And on one hand, I really do wish the whole studio had a better mix of traditional and computer animation instead of relying so heavily on models and simulation.
Nothing's wrong!
But when you look at it from a more academic perspective, the choice to use CGI animation opens the door to discussing even more rhetorical techniques that can derive meaning. For instance, we can talk about camera work even though the only cameras involved in the production of the film were virtual. But we can also study the way animation tells the story of Encanto in a way live action never could. Because CGI animation exists in a limbo between traditional live action and animation techniques, we can use both to conduct medium-specific analysis. Let's talk about the ways in which the sequence couldn't be filmed with real cameras and why that's a huge benefit for an animated musical. For instance, sections of the sequence massively mess with the scale and proportion of its characters because virtual models can be stretched and scaled in ways that human actors can't. You could technically get some of these effects by using something like forced perspective, but honestly, without virtual effects, which would be using CGI anyway, it would be pretty much impossible to get to the same level of details on set, and forget getting everything so perfectly timed in musical cues. This results in scenes that are larger than life and better exemplify the intense emotional feelings that Luisa has in this metaphorical space. For the same reason she's singing instead of speaking, animation is just a better medium to capture these spectacular emotions. In fact, because the production wasn't limited by location shoot deadlines, inclement weather, or whatever other variable filming condition, they were able to create so many massive set pieces that make this metaphorical space inside of Luisa's consciousness feel like an entire world of its own. Not to mention that the characters perform stunts that would just end up as a series of lawsuits if they tried it with real humans. trained professionals or not. Like, you try navigating a slalom of erupting geysers and then hopping onto a column of water shooting straight in the air and being launched into who knows where. It's not going to end well! And the virtual nature of the cameras means that pulling focus is a matter of pressing a few buttons rather than shooting over and over again the same thing to make sure you get crisp definition on complex moves. Which also means less disorienting cuts because they're able to pull off impossibly quick camera movements that would have required massive rigs or dollies or maybe even drones to accomplish in real life. Making the sequence, and the entire film, animated allows for fantastical, impossible movement and composition. And nothing ends up looking fake because they're able to achieve a continuity of style that would be not possible on film. I don't care how expensive your puppet is, it is not going to look as good or move as convincingly as this model of Cerberus. Another key animation vocab word here is the idea of metamorphosis, or the way frames form into one another. And I'll get to how the sequence flows so smoothly because of its clever transitions in a minute, but we also see metamorphosis in the characters themselves, specifically the way they're able to deform and then pop back, unlike a normal human. Take the tightrope scene where Mirabel is launched into the air. If you go frame by frame, you can see the way that her face is mashed like a rubber ball for less than a second. Her hair and clothing are simulated to behave like these textures really would in similar circumstances, but the animators were able to exaggerate impacts to make them feel more severe.
Pressure like a drip, drip, drip that'll never stop.
Everything feels heavier and hits harder than it would in real life. That being said, there is a lot of meaning that we can draw from real life cinematography and the way it's used throughout the film. And I'm not going to touch on everything that I noticed because, well, I don't want to make a 14-hour video, but here are a few key tricks that the animators used to wring out even more tragedy from the song. I think the easiest place to start here is talking about the transitions between the different vignettes and why they're so smooth. Throughout the song, there are 17 different and distinct locations in Luisa's inner world, but I'm willing to bet that you didn't notice, because there's hardly any hard cuts between the different scenes. Most of the cuts are obscured by a variety of different camera tricks that make the whole sequence seem continuous. For instance, there are so many times where an object comes and fills the frame momentarily to hide a cut. There's one behind this falling debris, this donkey, this falling fruit, this other piece of fruit, Luisa's fist, and this cloud. But we also have cuts hidden with camera movement that blur the frames and make everything seem seamless. Like this one in fog, this one that uses Luisa's downward motion as something for our eyes to track and distract us from the cut, this pretty awesome whip pan, and more fog. We also have cuts that hide behind lens flares, like the one from Luisa's downward dive, or when Mirabel is flung into the sky. Again. Also the transition to the cliff scene. What these hidden cuts do is stitch all of the different locations together into one nightmarish reality. There is never any time to catch your breath. No cracks, no breaks, just one dangerous situation right after another, forcing Luisa to take non-stop action. And notice that the only one who finds these breakneck transitions disorienting is Mirabel. Luisa is unaffected by the constant change. This is her life. These are the constant anxiety-filled situations that she has to manage on a dime every day. But she takes time to put her sister first, constantly looking out for family and making sure that Mirabel is safe before she tackles the danger. Like, she takes the time to notice and fix Mirabel's glasses, and that is just so heartwarming and heartbreaking. Ugh. But speaking of moving Mirabel to safety, if you look at the direction of motions connecting all of these scenes, you'll notice that Luisa is pretty much always moving to the right. Danger tends to take up the right half of the frame, like Cerberus, the falling weights, the iceberg, the domino doors, etc., etc. When Hercules wimps out and runs away and Luisa has to step up and take responsibility, he runs to the left, she turns to the right. However, in one of the first moments that Luisa actually admits she's scared, she turns to the left to say,
I'm pretty sure I'm worthless
as if acknowledging her weakness before she pivots to the right. And if you really pay attention, you'll notice all the times that Luisa readjusts Mirabel's position from the right half of the frame to the left. Danger to safety. Even before the song starts.
Why would anything be wrong? I'm totally fine. The magic's fine. Luisa's fine. I'm totally not nervous.
You can also draw directional meaning from rotation and camera movement throughout the sequence. For instance, the iceberg is ever so slightly twisting in a clockwise direction, and so is the camera in the dramatic 360-degree pan. When she sings about how the pressure is growing, the figures of Luisa and Mirabel are twisting in another clockwise spiral. And when she's doing her stage performance at the end, the platform she's standing on is also twisting clockwise, whereas the virtual camera is on another outer ring going the other way, which exaggerates her movement even more. Now, from a top-down view, spinning something clockwise would be considered turning it to the right. And if I remember from my very limited time in shop class, isn't it lefty-loosey, righty-tighty? Tension is just slowly but constantly building up throughout the entire sequence. In fact, the only prominent counterclockwise movement I could find in the entire sequence is when Luisa was spinning casita with her feet, which, number one, means that she was kicking out her legs to the right, keeping with our established direction, and two, means that part of her crushing responsibilities is to unwind everyone else. Her family, represented by the house, depend on her to take the pressure off of them. Now, the really cool thing here is that there is a portion of the sequence where Luisa is not moving to the right of the frame. But it's only when she's fantasizing about letting go of her responsibilities and just floating through the clouds. Here she's finally allowed to just drift backwards, unconcerned with facing the danger to the right or making any sort of progress. She's literally moving backwards. And this is also the moment where Luisa begins to ignore Mirabel, or at least not keep an eye out for her safety. She doesn't even notice that she's lost her glasses, something she just took precious time to fix seconds before. But speaking of camera movement, there's one very obvious move that gets repeated over and over again throughout the sequence. And that's the dramatic camera pullback that reveals whatever new dangerous situation Luisa has to face next. Like the tightrope Cerberus, her victory from slaying Cerberus, giant scale Luisa, the unsteady globe weights, the cliffside, the erupting volcano, the iceberg, and the final crushing weight scene. Now, one kind of odd thing is that none of these camera pullbacks conceal any cuts. They are all just one continuous shot that reframes everything without cutting to a new angle. But I also like to point out that most, if not all, of these wide angles are shot with a wide angle lens, which probably merits a quick lesson on camera lens choices and how virtual cameras work. This video really is going to be 14 hours, isn't it? Okay, so every time you shoot something with a camera, you have to choose a lens, even if that's just the default one that came in the kit. And typically that default is going to be something like a 50mm focal length. The focal length of a lens is the distance from the surface of the lens to its focal point, so a normal lens is about 50mm. Anything lower than 35mm would be considered a wide angle, and larger than 80mm is a telephoto lens. Changing the focal length of a lens messes with perspective and scale. For instance, some wide-angle lenses can result in a bit of a fisheye effect on the edges of the frame. But there is no difference when it comes to virtual cameras. Unlike traditional 2D animation, CGI animation is all about models and simulation. It's more like building sets on a computer than drawing a picture. When you go to animate your models, a virtual camera is placed in that computer-generated scene. And this camera, even if it's not technically real, still has a lens that mimics the way light behaves on a real set. For instance, take a look at this incredibly basic scene I've set up in Adobe After Effects. Here we have a background and two equal-sized figures in the foreground. Now I'm going to move them so that Luisa is closer to the camera and Mirabel is a bit further away. Shooting with a 50mm lens, we see that Luisa appears to be a little bit bigger than Mirabel simply because she's closer to the camera. But when we switch to a 55mm or wide angle, that space is exaggerated. Not only does Luisa appear even bigger, but the space in between her and Mirabel also looks wider. And remember that the only thing we changed was the focal length of the lens. This is because a wide angle lens takes up the planes that make up a composition and pulls them apart, effectively giving it more depth, which is contrasted by what telephoto lenses do by squishing the same planes together, making everything feel more shallow. Luisa and Mirabel feel closer together. They look to be a more similar size. Now, wide-angle, normal, and telephoto lenses are all extremely useful tools, but one way that surface pressure uses wide angles is to convey a sense of scope. Take a look at the first major pullback we get in the tightrope shot. See how the edges of the room seem to crawl up the sides of the frame? That's a telltale sign of a wide-angle lens being used as a tool for distortion. It makes this room feel both massive and constraining, the oxymoronic feeling of being trapped inside of a claustrophobic chasm. awesome. Another great wide angle is the scene with Cerberus. As the dog lunges forward because of these stretched out panels, his necks appear to move further and faster than they would if they were filmed by a camera with a longer focal length. Also, wide angle lenses are the only way to perform a technique called deep focus, where both the background and foreground of an image are in focus. So in this shot, when we see that both the rubble nearest to the camera and the arches in the far back of the stadium are both perfectly in focus, we can assume that a wide angle lens was probably used. There are a few more subtle uses of wide angle lens sprinkled throughout the rest of the song, like even before the singing begins. If you pay really close attention, like way too close attention at the beginning of the sequence, you'll notice that the over-the-shoulder shots use different lenses. You see, from Mirabel's perspective, Luisa's head appears smaller than hers. But in the reverse shot, both heads appear to be approximately the same size, meaning that the camera with a focus on Luisa was likely using a wider lens. I would guess that the animators made this decision to show how Mirabel puts her sister even higher on a pedestal than she actually is. Throughout the film, Mirabel feels distant from her family, and this is just one tiny example of how these stretched out planes make her appear physically further away. But my favorite use of camera lenses in the whole song is in the cliff scene where we get this shot of Luisa holding on to Mirabel. Look at the size difference between Luisa's two hands. If this were a telephoto lens, there wouldn't be such a drastic difference. And by shooting from this angle with a short focal length, the planes that get stretched out elongate Luisa's arm span, making it appear as if there's even more tension in her body than there really is. That's so cool! Heartbreaking, but cool! If you want more focal length action, there are actually two shots in the sequence where we see a transition between different lenses. In other words, a zoom. One is a very subtle dolly zoom when Luisa stands her ground against the volcanic eruption. A dolly zoom is achieved by physically moving the camera closer to the subject while zooming out. Think of the famous reaction shot from Jaws. The effect is that the background appears to warp around the subject, which remains approximately the same size. Here it looks like everything is shrinking away from the danger except for Luisa, who is like a solid rock who doesn't give an inch. But the more obvious example is on the word blow in one of the final verses, where the exact opposite warp happens.
Pressure like a tick, 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 till it's ready to blow.
Check out how we can physically see the background shifting from a stretched out wide angle to a squished telephoto lens, as if the entire room is closing in on her from the uncontrollable pressure. That's just... Okay, let's finish drawing by talking about some of the most simple and effective camera techniques. Angles. This is a straight angle. It makes everything feel steady or normal. This is a Dutch angle, otherwise known as a tilt angle for obvious reasons. It's responsible for making things feel uneasy or unbalanced. Like when Luisa is struggling to hold up the globe weights and the whole scene seems to swim in and out of balance. Because the frame keeps tipping back and forth in between two opposite tilt angles. Speaking of tipping, the angle gets incrementally more Dutch on the words tip, tip, tip as she struggles to hold up more weights at the end.
Pressure that'll tip, 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 till you just go pop.
We also have a Dutch angle after the 360-degree spin when Luisa can't handle the pressure of a tornado bludgeoning towards them. Oh man, that first toppling door is her own, the one that represents her place in the family. Anyway, Luisa is super tall, meaning that many of the shots from Mirabel's perspective use low angles that highlight her sister's heroism. Low angles historically represent power, strength, and confidence, all parts of the persona Luisa has to wear all the time. But in the reverse shots of Mirabel, she gets high angles that make her look weak or in danger, in need of saving from Luisa's perspective. This is consistent throughout the entire sequence. When Luisa has to step up and be the strong one, she is shot with a powerful low angle. Except in the floating fantasy scene, where after Luisa admits her inner fears, she and Mirabel float on the same level, finally seeing eye to eye. Here Luisa is not superhuman or a symbol of strength, she's just Mirabel's sister, and it's beautiful. Until everything comes crashing back down to earth and she is reminded that she has no choice. She has to wear her strength in order to protect her loved ones. And here is where we get the most severe high versus low shot reverse shots we get in the entire sequence. But now Luisa is placed on the left side of the frame, signaling that her strength is her weakness. What puts Louisa in true danger is her commitment to putting her family first at the cost of her own safety. And then we get this shot of Mirabel framed through the gap in Louisa's arms, as if in a protective bubble framed by her muscles. The physical representation of her magical gift. The song finishes by toggling between these stage performances where Louisa seems to be putting on some sort of show. Of course, revealing that her mask is sort of a performance put on to conceal her suppressed anxiety. And ends with this eye-level angle of Louisa barely holding up the whole Encanto. The frame is evenly bisected by a line where the weight meets her shoulders, as if everything is perfectly in balance. She has just enough strength to keep the world from collapsing in on her, but one more ounce and it would all come crashing down. And then she throws it all up in the air, a single moment of relief. But we know that it all has to fall back down again soon. And that's surface pressure. You see why this is such a beautiful sequence? I didn't even get to everything on my list. There is so much more we could discuss. Color theory, shaky versus steadicam, diegesis, scene composition, and mise-en-scène. The interplay between context, lyrics, music, and visuals are what make this scene such a masterpiece of storytelling. It's metaphorical, but easily digestible for children. It's gorgeous and terrifying. It's a whole complex journey that takes us to 17 different worlds and then ends up right where it began. Sure, We Don't Talk About Bruno is amazing, but this is just brilliant. Was that too much of an info dump? But hey, you stuck around this long, so you must have enjoyed it, right? Right? If you really did like this video, please let me know in the comment section down below. I am so curious as to what details I managed to miss. What's your take on the song? Is there a better one from the film? While you're down there, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter at theory_central. The only place with more rats than Bruno's walls. You can also help support us on Patreon, like the incredible David W., who I'm sure never feels like a tightrope rocker in a 3-ring circus. And if you really want to see the rest of my notes from this sequence, I'll post a whole document on Patreon available for tiers as low as $1 a month, along with exclusive blooper reels and a chance to have your name read after every single video, like the incredible David W., who's never been a straw in a sack that broke the camel's back. But that is all I have for now. So thanks for watching. Dolores can hear you clicking onto another video right now, and I'll see you later.
Quitter!